The following interviews and events were originally filmed so that I might use pieces of each to eventually make a summation video about my experiences with the raw food diet and its community here in Boulder. I've since come to consider that the information contained in each session might be valuable for raw foodists or others interested in the subject, so I decided to present as much of each complete event as possible. Many thanks go to CATV, Boulder's public access community television station, for the opportunity to work on these videos as a way to develop my skills in video production. And I do hope that there is useful information here for anyone interested in the raw food diet and lifestyle.
But if you even go deeper from sadness and hurt, and you're willing to experience that instead of popping out into the surface and telling some story about it, because the story is the mental aspect, whereas feeling these emotions is what I'm describing here on the right side of the chart. If you're willing to go deeper, what we often find is a feeling of depression or despair. Or even a sense of hopelessness. So what I'm pointing out here is that the good news is that these also are temporary. These are what are called limited negative emotions, with the key word here being limited. Just like the physical toxins are temporary, if we're willing to go deeper, when we experience things like anger, sadness, hurt, depression, despair, if we're willing to feel those instead of, go into a mental story about, oh, they did this to me, and so on and so forth, then what happens is that we start to experience, this isn't the good news yet, but it's this sense of hopelessness. Great news, huh? And below that even is this sense of this black hole. I don't know if many of you have studied Western philosophy, but if you've studied like Descartes and Hume, this is as far as they got. They actually experienced this and they said, I'm not going there, because the whole ego structure is actually designed to avoid despair and hopelessness and this sense of emptiness inside, this sense of black hole. So that's why we continually pop out into these surface levels of these mental and emotional toxins. But what we find is that if you're willing to also experience each of these without acting on them, then a very similar occurrence takes place as what happened on the physical level of the body. Because if you're willing to go through the detoxification of the physical body, then what happens is that the symptoms like headache and vomiting and diarrhea and sore throat, they're by and large not going to be, they're going to be a thing of the past. Not in an absolute sense, but compared to senior citizens that we see, we're not going to live a life of age-related illnesses. If you're willing to go through it, you'll be causing health to occur instead of causing disease. And it's not just physical health, but it's mental health and emotional health. You don't have to be senile. You don't have to experience Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and so forth. Instead, what goes on beyond the black hole, that's the gateway to our qualities of essence, of the soul. Things like love, non-sentimental love. Not love as an emotion, but love as your core essence. Just spontaneously expressing that, not as a mental concept, but as part of your heart, as who you are. Because all these mental and emotional toxins veil that. Kindness, compassion, joy, spontaneity, purity. These are qualities that are inherent within us, and yet they're veiled by these mental and emotional toxins, and yet they also are limited and temporary. That's the good news. But there has to be a willingness to burn in these negative emotions, just like there's a willingness to go through the physical symptoms, whether it's headache or fever or what have you. I mean, my own personal experience, when I first started on this diet, I would get canker sores nonstop in my mouth. They're painful. It's even hard to chew when you have a mouthful of canker sores. And yet, I understood what the body was going through. I was one of the lucky ones that did not come to this path from experiencing illness. It just made so much sense to me because my undergraduate degree was in a program called Natural Law. It studied the laws of nature in physics, biology, chemistry, and mathematics. And when I heard about natural hygiene that applied those same laws in nature to human health, I was shocked. And I said to myself, if this actually works off the drawing board, it's something that I have to personally experience to verify for myself. So lo and behold, I start increasing the fresh produce in my diet, and I get all these canker sores. But yet, I had read all these case studies about detoxification, so intellectually I knew what was going on. And for almost 18 months, for getting close to a year and a half, 2 years, I had what on the outside looked like diarrhea. And yet, it did not take place with fever or stomach ache like true diarrhea does. But it looked like that in the latrine, if you will. And yet, again, I knew what was going on because they were temporary symptoms of detoxification and healing. All the mucoid plaque that lines the intestines will slowly be rehydrated by high water content foods and slowly scraped out of the system by the high fiber diet. And that's what was going on in my system. In a similar way, with the mental and emotional aspect of who we are, as far as being a body is concerned, we also see a parallel phenomenon taking place. How many of you are on a conscious spiritual path, whether that means prayer, meditation, or what have you? I mean, oftentimes, with the groups that I've spoken in front of, they verify what my experience was, that of all the years of meditating, why do I still feel depressed? I deserve better than this. And until I learned this and realized the parallels, it really didn't make sense. But then when I learned how to quiet the mind systematically through the meditation that I share with right now inmates in federal prisons and in state penitentiaries in Oregon, it shows people how to go beyond the black hole by experiencing a silent, quiet mind. And that's where the veils can be peeled. And what's left over are these qualities of essence that truly is our heart. Not the heart in our chest, but our core essential nature. That's really what it means to be a fully rounded human being. And that's what takes place through this whole system of natural hygiene that historically is focused more on the physical. And yet if you look at the early hygienists that go back to the early 1800s, they also included the spiritual side of it, mental and emotional and the spiritual aspect as well. And that's what Healthful Living International is reviving in this new millennium. So before I go on, are there any questions I can answer about this parallel? Yes, sir.
Where does fear come into your...
Okay, very good. I forgot to put that one up. Fear is right here. Thanks for mentioning that. Now, for most personality types, this is the way it works. I've studied a system that the ancient Sufis brought to the West about 3,500 years ago called the Enneagram that some of you may or may not be familiar with. It's typically been taught as personality types, and yet that's very superficial because the core of it is really what lies beneath personality types that are called character fixations. And what a fixation is where spirit has tied itself into a knot and has misidentified itself as a physical body. And what happens is that we actually identify ourselves in this earth culture more as a mental body, a physical body, and an emotional body as opposed to being awareness itself. So what happens is that we see this veiling taking place of love, of awareness, and of emptiness or silence that we contact in our prayer and in our meditation. And when we come back out into the world, all of our buttons get pushed once again. And we see ourselves behaving like a robot without even having really the wherewithal to break those habit patterns. And that's what the Enneagram describes in details, how to be free of the mind's imprisonment. And that's what I share with the inmates in Oregon, that I tell them straight out, you know, freedom isn't outside there. Freedom could be inside in prison just as easily because it's the mind's imprisonment that you have to break yourself of. And what I'm speaking about as far as the Enneagram is concerned is really a bridge between modern psychology and ancient spiritual wisdom. From the Christian mystics, from the Sufis, from the Muslim faith, from the Kabbalah, from the Jewish faith, from the Advaita Vedantist and the Hindu faith, from Zen Buddhism. It's a synthesis of non-dual wisdom with modern psychology that forms this bridge and describes how to break free of these mental and emotional toxins. And it's an amazing parallel with what natural hygiene describes that takes place with the physical body. And once again, what that parallel is that these are all limited negative emotions as long as we're willing to burn in these sensations instead of acting them out. Just like instead of taking a suppressant, whether it's a pharmaceutical or an alternative, whether it's an herbal drug. You know, herbs are also drugs. That's why when you study herbology, they classify them the same way that pharmacists do, as emetics or purgatives or laxatives. It's the same exact classifications as pharmaceuticals, except one grows out in nature, and most people forget that most drugs are derived from herbs in the first place. So even though it's an alternative drug. That's not the answer because it's just going to suppress symptoms. And that's true whether you're taking it to suppress an emotional symptom like St. John's wort that's often taken for depression, or a physical symptom. So once again, it's a temporary detoxification mode, if you will, or phenomenon, as long as you're willing to go through it. If instead you act on the different symptoms, which is understandable. I mean, who wants to be in pain? It's not fun to be in pain. But if you can bear it, and hopefully grin and bear it, then you'll find that it's temporary, and by and large, you will not have to experience that again. Yes, question. Okay, let me repeat the question. The question was, what does it really mean when I say allow yourself to burn in these sensations? I would imagine you're talking about the mental and emotional aspect. Let me ask you a question. Do you meditate or pray? Okay. And I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but you have a sense of more peace inside when you pray? Okay. What it means to burn is to sit in that peace while these mental and emotional toxins are coming to the surface. Because anything that's been suppressed in the subconscious needs to be liberated. It's just anything that's been suppressed in the cells and tissues needs to be liberated. And that's once again the parallel here. So when you pray over a lifetime, when you meditate over a lifetime and get familiar with these silent, quiet levels of the mind, then all the subconscious mental and emotional toxins also want to be met in love and acceptance. So once again, it's a blessing in disguise. But what we ordinarily do when we don't understand that is we immediately jump into a mental story about it. And it becomes a mental toxin. You know, I feel depressed, I'm angry because of blah, 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 blah. And the burning, once again, is the willingness to abide in that inner peace while that toxin is coming up. And it literally feels like a burning sensation in your system. It's just like Robert was talking about with caffeine. Caffeine will cause the circulatory system to be whipped into a frenzy in order to remove that substance from your system. In a similar way, these mental and emotional toxins will also spin your mind into a frenzy. And the willingness to burn in that is the willingness to be still. And that's why familiarity with inner silence is key to freedom from unnecessary mental and emotional suffering. Did I see a hand up with the question? Yes.
Do you think that your canker sores were due to maybe too much citric acid?
No.
Okay. All I know is when I eat a really acidic food, I get canker.
This is a great question. Did everybody hear it?
No.
Okay, what the question was did I think that the canker sores were due to too much citric acid? It's due to an acidic condition in your body. Now, it may be reacting to the citric acid. That may be true, but it's not due to the citric acid. Because once your body is unpolluted, then you could eat as much citric acid as you want. You will not get that reaction whatsoever. So the soil is an acidic condition of your system, which means a polluted condition in your body. Yes?
Is it reasonable to look at those things you list on the right side as kind of a progression, maybe on the way down, and then a progression that you could experience on the way back as well?
Yeah, I mean, here's what the experience is. You can jump from level to level. It isn't like an immediate progression, but what will happen is that if you immediately sink into anger through the black hole into what's called essence, which is silence, and it's really emerging with your mind's source. It's really merging into love and awareness and silence. If you jump directly to there, then anything that's a latent tendency will eventually come up to be liberated. And where the conditioning comes in that we need to learn to break is to stop suppressing these symptoms. Because we suppress them in innumerable ways. Sex, drugs, alcohol, using food as a drug. And what happens instead is that as you become deeply familiar with essence, which is a quiet, peaceful mind, then you can go through all these storms. It's just like what I call it is abiding in the eye of the hurricane. You sit in the eye of a hurricane, you've got storms all around you, but that eye of the hurricane is calm. So this is a roadmap. The direct experience is actually eating the meal, if you will. So while this roadmap I found extremely useful I can't rip this up into pieces and serve it to you on your plates. Even if I could, that wouldn't be very useful. First of all, it's too high in fiber, and second of all, it wouldn't help. The bottom line is the willingness to actually make this a lifestyle through the food that we're serving you, through the non-dietary essentials that we're also teaching you. And the non-dietary essentials, aside from the food, of course, are enough physical activity, enough sunshine, and enough love, learning how to deal with your mental and emotional nature as well. I mean, just to wrap it up, I used to be the Dean of Students at Life Science Institute in Austin, Texas. It's the school that T.C. Fry started when he was still alive. There were people there at the time that had a way better diet than I did. This is before I was 100% raw. And yet, my whole segue into this whole lifestyle had been through a meditative path. I started meditating as a teenager, and I didn't even know about food. I didn't care about physical health until much later. And these people I was working with in Texas, even though they had a better diet, they didn't know how to deal with the mental and emotional aspect of who they were, so they were miserable, even though they were eating a great diet. So it's not all food. If you want to be freed of the mind's imprisonment, in other words, these negative emotions, then it's imperative to learn how to calm your mind so that it sinks back into its source. And what that source is silence. Thank you.
Thank you, Art.
There you go, brother.
So it's not all food. Aw. I like numbers, math, and equations and logic and stuff like that. And I'm challenged sometimes to reach people that don't think that way, or to even realize there are people who don't think that way. And my partner, Rosie, is one of those people who doesn't think that way. Bless her, she balances me out just beautifully. And normally when we give presentations, that's how we give them. She's more of the heart than I am, and I crunch numbers for people and give them the results of research and whatnot. And it tends to work out rather well. It gives a really balanced view of things.
She's the honey, you're the vinegar.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. So it's a little bit of a surprise when Rosie came up with this, or to me it was a bit of a surprise when Rosie came up with this upcoming presentation, which I will tell you in advance, she does, as far as I know, she's the only one giving it on the planet, but she does it better than anybody ever will. And probably all of you have been asked at some point, besides where do you get your protein, although I was in Tampa giving a presentation, and when we were all done and the woman's question was, where do you get your cobalt? That's one I've never been asked again. Dark green leafy vegetables is the answer, in case you want to know. But as it is for every mineral. But everybody's been asked questions about raw food. Why do you eat raw food? But is cooked food really bad for you? How is it bad for you? And most of us either mumble something under our breath or say, well, it's obvious because none of the other animals eat cooked food and nutrients are lost, or it's a vague scenario at best. But the information is there. The information is textbook material. It's just in bits and pieces scattered all over the place. Rosie has searched it out, has put it together, and will give you some information that will make it so easy for you to respond to anyone that you don't have to go into some pokey areas. You know, I think like the enzymes are deactivated, or I don't really know, but it's got to be better for you raw, because it's got to be, right? It's obvious. Well, it is obvious after she tells you. So please, Rosie Gruben, come on up. We got till 12. After Rosie's talk, we'll take a short break. So you know it's coming. Take it away.
I think you sat there long enough. Do you think so too? Okay, so let me just tell you what's going to happen at this point. Later on, at the end of the day, I'm going to lead some choreographed, organized group dance. It's going to be really fun. And for those of you guys out there who are thinking, I'm a guy and I don't do the dance thing, you know, this is okay, because this is kind of dance you'll feel all right with. But, you know, when I've done this in the past, people haven't always kind of got the steps really easy. So I thought, just before we do any more talk, I'll just teach you the first step so that you'll be kind of one step ahead when we begin this evening. So stand up a moment. Okay. It's really nice and simple. You need to make sure you've got room either side of you to take 2 side steps. Okay? That's all it is, just 2 side steps. Can you do that? Okay. Right, here it goes. With your right leg, just put your heel on the floor in front of you. You done that? Just put your heel. Okay. Now put your toe. Now lift your knee up. Put your foot down. Not too difficult, huh? 2 side steps this way. 1, 2. Now the other side. Heel, toe, knee, down. 2 side steps. 1, 2. Hey, we're rolling. Let's pick up the speed. Here we go. Right side. Heel, toe, lift and down. 2 steps. Other side. Heel, toe, lift and down. 2 steps. There you go. You're dancing, you see. Now, hang on. Before you sit down, what I want you to do now is I want you to take 1 step backwards, leading with your right leg first. That's important. Here you go. 1 step back. Nobody hit anything? Oh, I'm so relieved. Okay. Now, what we're going to do this time is we're going to step forward with the right leg, and, especially for the guys, we're going to hit a soccer ball. Kick a soccer ball, okay? Right, okay. So step forward with your right leg, 1 kick. Okay, bring your feet together. Let's do that one more time. Step backwards, leading with your right leg first. Now step forward with that right leg and kick. That's very good. Now, that leg that's come forward to kick, that left leg, that's the one that now steps back first. So stick it out in front of you to remind yourself that's where it finished at the end of the kick. Now step back with it. Okay. Now that's the one to lead this time, and you kick with your right leg. Your right leg, yeah. Okay. So it goes like this, a little bit fastened up. It's just step back, step forward, kick. Step back, step forward, kick. A little bit more complex, right? Okay. Let's try one more time before you sit down. Step back on your right leg. Bring your left leg too. Now step forward with that right leg and kick. Now take that left leg all the way back. Bring the other one. Now step forward with the left leg and kick the right. Now you can practice that all through lunch, so that by the time we get to tonight, you'll be going, oh, this is so easy, okay? Have a seat, well done. Do we by any chance have any other British people in the audience? I'm all alone. Yes, Holland counts, Esther, Holland counts. Do you know, the reason I ask that is because English people would be very familiar with a newspaper called the Daily Telegraph. You might even have heard of it over here. It's a very popular national paper. And I happened to be passing the newspaper stand a few weeks back when I was in the UK, and something really caught my eye, which is very rare because I make a point of avoiding newspapers at all costs, as I do TV. And I just happened to glance and I saw this title, and it said, carcinogenic substances discovered in cooked food. And I thought, you know, the world suddenly become aware. What does carcinogenic mean? Potentially can contribute to causing or be a primary cause of cancer. And this article went on to explain that scientists have discovered that these certain changes happen inside foods when they're subjected to heat that results in these particular chemicals that can create cancer. And it was on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. I mean, this is progress, folks. This is us really moving forwards out there. As I said to you earlier, I'm interested in what inspires people, what fuels their motivation. Now, for most people, if somebody says to you, oh, you should eat raw food, it's much better for you, how inspiring is that? I mean, when you go into the shop there and you've kind of like got all the lovely bakery goods and the dairy and all the stuff, and then you've got the produce over here, and you bring to mind that remark somebody made, you should eat raw because it's better for you. It's not incredibly powerful as an inspiration, is it? But what about if you really knew a lot more about what happens to foods when we put them in a fire, when we heat them? If you really understood the changes that take place to those nutrients, to those foods, would that not be more of an inspiration than simply, it's better for you? Would you agree, if you knew more? Okay, so that's what I want to share with you in this short session this morning. I want to tell you a little bit more about what specifically happens to nutrients in foods when they're subjected to heat. Now, as Art mentioned earlier, you know, when we look at what species on this planet are consuming cooked food, we're looking exclusively at humans. And essentially, I believe what happened was that we discovered fire, and then that magic question sprung to somebody's mind, I wonder what would happen if. And they kind of looked at their food and looked at the fire and thought, I wonder what would happen if we put that in that. And that question, I wonder what would happen if, is primarily what has enabled us to progress with technology. What's enabled us to eventually land on the moon. A whole series of different occasions of people and scientists saying, I wonder what would happen if we put this with this or we did this. Doesn't always mean because we can do something, it's what is in our best interest to do, as I'm now going to strive to demonstrate to you. Now, in this particular newspaper article, the thing that they were focusing on is a substance called acrolein. Of the nutrients, let's just look at fat, protein, and carbohydrate for the moment. And let's begin our journey by looking at fat, because subjecting fat to heat is probably more of a dangerous game to play than subjecting either protein or carbohydrate to heat, although they also are very detrimentally affected. But when we subject fats to heat, changes take place which make them incredibly carcinogenic. What we find is produced when we heat fats is this substance called acrolein. And they did some studies some years back, actually, which weren't very well publicized or well known, but I managed to dig them out some years ago. And these were studies comparing people who worked in a deep fry establishment who did not smoke and people who smoked 20 cigarettes a day and had done for 20 years. And they compared the likelihood of people suffering from lung cancer. And it turned out that the people who did not smoke and had never smoked but worked in a deep fry establishment were no less than 10 times more liable to get lung cancer than people who'd smoked 20 cigarettes a day for 20 years. Because this acrolein gas is given off during the heating of that fat, and it has very detrimental effects upon your health. So next time you go past the deep fry establishment, perhaps you've made the commitment to eat raw, but you still kind of enjoy that smell. Don't go, oh, that's good, because you're really not doing yourself a favor, you know, you're taking in all that acrolein gas. In addition to that, when we subject fats to heat, what we do is we tend to cause the creation of some little beasties called free radicals. Have you ever heard of free radicals? Okay. Free radicals, for those of you who are not quite familiar with them, I'd like to compare it to going to a disco. Now, how many of you can remember going to a disco? I'm sure you don't go now. How many of you still go? Okay. A disco or a nightclub. You know, I remember the days when I used to go in my wild younger days. I was wild once, really, believe me. And I used to go along to these nightclubs And at the beginning of the evening, everyone would be kind of looking really cool, and just sort of strutting around and eyeing up the opposite gender. And being rather picky and selective. And people paired off during the evening. And by the end of the evening, there were a few lonely souls who hadn't paired off. And at this point, they weren't being too selective. They didn't actually mind who they paired off with, as long as they didn't have the embarrassment of going home on their own. This is rather a good analogy for free radicals. Free radicals are unstable oxygen molecules. They kind of will readily attach onto almost anything. And in doing so, have a knock-on effect that's detrimental to your body on a cellular level. Now, when we subject fats to heat, what we are doing is we are predisposing ourselves to the creation of more of these free radicals. I mean, they do exist all of the time. It's a natural part of living. But in our modern day lives, they are far more prolific than they are supposed to be in our natural existence. We do have an army, however, against these free radicals. We have a little army consisting of beta-carotene, vitamin C, vitamin E, and selenium. And the story goes like this. Here we have in the bloodstream the martyr of the group, the beta-carotene, who kind of floats around and says, "Don't attack the cell, take me instead." Real martyr job with the beta-carotene. If by any chance the free radicals don't fall for the martyr beta-carotene, then vitamin C attempts to attack them. If the free radicals manage to permeate through into the intracellular fluids, there we have another line of defense too, which is our vitamin E. But vitamin E sometimes gets injured, and so vitamin C comes along a bit like Florence Nightingale and sort of heals vitamin E. It's all rather an interesting little scenario. But then even so, it's possible that the free radicals could permeate right through into the cell, and that's where we have selenium as our last line of defense. But what is interesting is that when we subject fats to heat, we actually are deranging those fats in a way that results in the destruction of the fat-soluble vitamins. Which are they? E, A, okay, for a start. It's not looking too good, is it? What we're doing is we're promoting more free radicals, more of these sort of lonely party dwellers, and at the same time, we're destroying our army that's there to protect ourselves against them. And free radicals can lead to all sorts of conditions, including atherosclerosis, as in heart disease or stroke, the forerunner to that, cancer, and various other degenerative conditions. When we heat fats, the fats tend to become sticky. If you think about, supposing you'd made a beautiful vegetarian or vegan lasagna, and I actually did this one time. This is back in my past when I used to do cooked stuff, which was over 15 years ago now. But I actually made a vegan dinner for somebody. It was a lasagna, and I'd cooked it. And I went into the kitchen after the party, and I had one, the rubber gloves and the whole business, and the scouring thing and the detergent. I'm scrubbing away at this pan, and I'm thinking, heck, if it takes, all this abrasiveness and chemicals to get this stuff off this pan, what the heck does the inside of my body look like? And then I realized that if I just put foods that were raw on a plate and eaten those to wash the plate, I could just rinse it under the cold tap and I'm done. A lot of that stickiness is to do with the adhesive quality that fats take on once they are subjected to heat. Now, when you have got sticky fats going round inside your bloodstream, this can lead to endless problems, not least of which is it can contribute to the likelihood of you suffering from some kind of embolism. An embolism is a blockage of some form, and it can come in many different types. But a typical type of embolism is what we call a thrombus, which is a clotting together of blood cells in that circulation. Our blood's designed to clot so that if we cut ourselves, we don't bleed to death. The problem happens when it starts to clot inside of our system. And that can occur when our blood gets sticky due to the intake of heated fats. So as you can see, heating fats is not a good idea. It is not contributing to your health. It also incidentally makes digestive processes far more difficult for your body to conduct. And when it comes to absorbing nutrients through the intestinal wall, fat has a nasty habit of forming a barrier, to put it in a simplified manner, to prevent those nutrients from properly entering your bloodstream. The story goes on and on, but I'm going to finish on fats there because I want to move on and talk with you a little bit about the carbohydrates and about the proteins. How many of you have ever experienced a headache? How many of you have ever experienced body odor? How many of you have ever experienced mucus? Okay. When we heat carbohydrates, I'm going to explain to you why this is, we end up smelling, pouring out mucus, and having a headache. That's not a very good place to be, is it? Why does this happen? Well, what I'm going to explain to you is a little series of events which I'd like you to not worry too much about remembering any technical terms, but just kind of get the idea of how the story unfolds. When we subject carbohydrates to heat, and let me just remind you that carbohydrates, when you see it written in a textbook, you'll see it written as CHO. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it does not stand for chocolate, okay? It stands for carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. And carbohydrates can be divided into two different branches. One branch of carbohydrates are all those complex carbohydrates that have to be subjected to heat if we stand any chance of digesting them at all, such as all the grains and so on and so forth. The other branch of carbohydrates are those carbohydrates that are in simpler forms and those which we are biologically designed to consume. If you happen to be a baby or an infant, we're looking at lactose in breast milk. And if you're an adult human, we're looking at fructose and glucose in fruits. But either way, they're carbohydrates. So when I talk about cooking carbohydrates, what I'm telling you relates both equally to milk, if you like, or fruit, just as much as it does the grains and so on and so forth. When we heat carbohydrates, the result is that they tend to ferment inside the system. This is due to a process called hydrolyzation, which I'm not going to go into at this point because it's not necessary to understand the eventual result. When fermentation takes place, various different things in the body are produced. And one of the things that is produced is acetic acid. There is a commonly used household product that you may bring to mind when I say acetic acid. What's that? It's vinegar. Yeah, vinegar. Acetic acid. Now, acetic acid has a knock-on effect inside the system. And the trouble is that acetic acid tends to cause a leaching of phosphorus from your body. Now, when phosphorus is being leached from your body, this has two effects on two different but very important parts of your anatomy. First of all, your thyroid gland becomes stimulated. And secondly, which is the path we're going to go down now, is that your adrenal glands become depleted. Do you know where your adrenals are? Yeah, the two little glands, and they sit there on top of your kidneys, just perched on top there. And you may have heard them referred to as your fight or flight glands, because when we get stressed, they get distinctly challenged, let's say. Now, when our adrenals start to become depleted, that's when we start suffering from the headaches, the excess production of mucus, and also we have that foul body odor. Let me just clarify for you about mucus. Mucus is not the enemy. Mucus is not something which attacks you. Mucus is produced by the body in order to transport toxins from the inside of the body to the outside environment. You have your bloodstream, which is designed to transport things around inside your body, but you don't use blood to carry toxins to the outside because you'd bleed to death pretty quick. So what we do is we produce mucus to carry things to the outside. So as soon as we start having mucus produced by the body, it's a sign that the body has realized its domain is threatened, its integrity is threatened, and it has to produce a transport medium to carry things out of itself. So when we're heating carbohydrates, what we're doing is essentially causing fermentation, causing the production of acetic acid, which is leaking phosphorus, which is causing a stimulation of the thyroid and a reduction in the ability of the adrenals to function. And that is what reduces the headaches, the mucus, and the body odor. So if you don't want to have a headache, be sniveling and smell, I suggest that you reduce the amount of carbohydrates in your diet that you cook. And of course, when we're looking at this group of carbohydrates, which is all the grains and so on and so forth, unless you're a person who chooses to sprout them, which is not something I recommend, but unless you're doing that, you're not going to be going down that road, because you are not designed anatomically, physiologically, biochemically to be able to digest grains. It's food for the birds. Leave it for them. When we come to look at proteins, we find some very interesting things going on here. Now, protein, I'd like you to bear with me on this a little bit, because it's a little bit kind of like a childish way of explaining things, but that's how I work. Okay, you guessed already. Think of protein as a house, and think of the bricks the house is made up of as being amino acids. Now, there's actually just over 20 different types of those bricks, of those amino acids. And what we do is we take those bricks and we build and construct our own human proteins. In fact, there's over 100,000 different types and shapes of buildings, if you like, inside of us made out of those bricks. Just the way you can take the 26 letters of the alphabet and produce the dictionary with all of those words. It's the same way you can build all these different proteins just out of those bricks. Now, in order to do that, when we take proteins into our system, we need to be able to break the bricks apart. We need to be able to do a demolition job on the house that we've consumed, because we want to build our own houses, and we need those bricks. What happens when you subject proteins to heat is that the cement between the bricks becomes very resistant to any attempts of breaking the bricks apart. They're called enzyme-resistant bonds. Now, what this means is that, unfortunately, instead of individual bricks passing through into our bloodstream, because we haven't been able to break them down properly because they've been deranged by cooking, bless you, what we end up with is chunks of rubble in the bloodstream instead of the individual bricks. That stimulates the action of prostaglandins, which set up inflammation. Other things happen to proteins when they're cooked. Let's go back to those bricks. Now, there's two of these bricks specifically that get very affected in a negative way by the subjection of heat. And those two specific ones are called methionine and cysteine. Cysteine is required for the manufacture of red blood cells, and methionine is required for the manufacture of hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin, as you may or may not know, is vital in order for us to get oxygen around our body. And I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a little fairy story about how this happens. How does that oxygen get to go around inside the body? Well, I'd like you to introduce you to a character first of all, and that is Princess Oxygen, okay? Bless her. Now, Princess Oxygen, there she is sort of floating around, you know, as princesses do, and we draw her in through these two little holes and this big hole down here, and she enters down into our respiratory tract, and she passes all the way down to the bottom of the lung, where she arrives inside a little transparent bubble. And there, in all her regal glory, she sits. And surrounding her little transparent bubble is the red brick road. And I'm talking here capillaries, okay? But red brick road, use your imagination. And on this red brick road, lo and behold, there's this knight in shining armor on his horse. And down, he starts prancing down the red brick road, okay, looking terribly handsome and all this kind of stuff on his horse. And Oxygen, sitting in her little bubble, basically thinks, "Caw, hey, wallop." Wouldn't mind a bit of that. Because he's a good-looking devil. So what she does is, she permeates through the wall of the bubble, through the wall of the capillary, because they're both gas permeable, and she jumps onto the back of his horse. And they gallop off together into the sunset. It's so romantic. And that's happening all the time you're sitting there while I'm talking with you. It's amazing. Such a romance inside your own body. Anyway, the knight in shining armor then delivers Princess Oxygen to wherever she's needed in the body. Point is, if we're heating our methionine, that amino acid, it's very, very difficult for our body to produce sufficient hemoglobin. So Princess Oxygen arrives in her bubble and sits there. And she waits. And seeing a knight in shining armor is about as common as us in England seeing a double-decker bus. They don't come along often, and when they do come, they probably aren't going where you want to go. If we are unable to manufacture red blood cells, we have a problem in delivering oxygen to the cells of our body. The same if we can't produce hemoglobin. When we subject cysteine and methionine to heat, what actually happens is that their sulfur component gets split away. They lose their sulfur component. Now, sulfur is our body's primary disinfectant. We use sulfur. Our body uses sulfur to keep itself disinfected. And once sulfur has been taken away from cysteine and methionine, guess what? We can't use it. We can only use it in the way that nature intended us to use it, attached to the cysteine and the methionine. So once it's been broken away by the subjection of heat, we are crippled in our ability to keep our bodies disinfected. In addition to that, because that sulfur's been split away, the methionine and cysteine cannot be used successfully to create hemoglobin and red blood cells. So let's just look at the implications of this. How many of you would actually choose to have wonderful mental clarity and acuity than be fuzzy-headed? Okay. How many of you appreciate and understand that really successful cognitive and mental functioning depends upon sufficient oxygen reaching the brain? How many of you would actually like to be physically fit? How many of you realize that in order to be physically fit in terms of aerobic or endurance exercise, we would need to be able to deliver oxygen successfully to the cells of our body? Trust me on this one, you do. Okay. And let me ask you this too. How many of you would prefer not to suffer from cancer in your life? How many of you know that cancers survive and thrive in what we call an anaerobic environment? That is to say, where there is no oxygen, yeah? And the more oxygen there is, the less liable that any of your cells are going to turn cancerous. So let's just retrace our steps. If we heat our proteins, and we are therefore crippling our ability to use cysteine and methionine, crippling our ability to produce hemoglobin and red blood cells, crippling our ability to get oxygen delivered and around our body, are we not reducing our cognitive and mental functioning, running the risk of getting cancer, and making it almost impossible to get truly fit? Wow. So is that a bit more inspiring than when someone says it's better for you to eat raw? Yeah? So now when you're standing there and you're going, bagel, banana, oh, you know, you can think, think of my cysteine and methionine, you know, and go for the banana. Hang on, I think the bagel was that side. Never mind. When it comes to vitamins and minerals, it's the one thing that most people appreciate do get depleted or damaged by the subjection of heat, and I'm not going to go into this in any great detail. But suffice it to say that with minerals, they are essentially lost, destroyed, or deranged in one of three ways. Either they undergo chemical changes which render them unavailable to us, or they actually leach out of the food itself, literally and physically leach out into surrounding liquids, or they evaporate. But what we do know is that on average, 48% of iron is destroyed in the foods that you eat that are cooked. We also know that 31.9% of calcium destroyed as soon as we subject a food to heat. We know that of apples, 50% of their mineral content is unavailable to us or totally destroyed when they're subjected to heat. We know that with carrots it's 30%, and with cabbage it's 40% of their total mineral content. We also know when it comes to vitamins that the B complex are pretty much wiped out wholesale when you subject that food to heat. They are very heat sensitive. Vitamin A is known to be a lot more stable when subjected to heat, but however, it is destroyed by oxygen. And therefore, when the food is broken down during the heating process, as it all falls apart, many, many sides of that food is exposed to oxygen, and therefore vitamin A is also destroyed. 45% is the average of vitamin C that is destroyed as soon as we subject something to heat. So when we start to look at these things, we can think, well, this makes a lot of sense. We start to understand that we weren't designed to put the food in the fire just because some bright spark said, I wonder what would happen if. This is what happens when you put the food in the fire. I'm telling you. Don't do it. Big mistake. But I say don't do it. Why is it so often that people don't manage to follow through? And I'm going to take the last couple of minutes just to alert you to 3 things that I've come across that are most common reasons that people aren't able to follow through on continuing to be on a raw food diet when they have decided that's what they're going to do. And very much, I think, it sort of follows on from what Art so eloquently and beautifully described to you all in his last session. There is, first of all, this issue of what substitutes satisfaction. Now, I had a very interesting thing happen which really beautifully illustrated what I'm hoping to share with you here. A client of mine who I was trying to encourage to eat more fruit in his life proudly called me up one day and said, well, I had my lunch, and he said, and I want to tell you, you'll be really impressed, I did consume 7 bananas. And I said, well, well done, and how was it for you, as you say? And he said, well, the hunger was completely dealt with. No problem, hunger went. Just did the job. I said, yes. He said, but I felt completely unsatisfied. So I sort of scratched my head, as you do when you're on the other end of a phone. And I said, you felt completely unsatisfied, but you weren't hungry anymore? He said, yes, I can't quite describe it, but the hunger'd gone, but I definitely wasn't satisfied, and I then went out and, had a cheese sandwich. The point is that if you consider all the detrimental effects upon food when they're cooked that I've just explained to you, when those deranged, destroyed to some large degree, perverted foods enter your beautiful, pristine domain, your body basically goes, ah! And the red alarm bells go on, and a tremendous amount of energy, going back to what Robert was talking about, a tremendous amount of that energy is required to deal with this toxic, deranged mess. And what that essentially means is that you do not have the available energy to get in touch with your emotions, coming up to what Art was talking about. Your body does thousands of different things all day long. Thousands of different things. But when it comes to the really big jobs, it likes to do one or the other, okay? I was once driving up to teach my university students in London, and they diverted us off the main motorway into the outback. Can you imagine outback in England? I mean, it makes it sound like Australia, but it was sort of green and not many signposts. We're very famous for that. I went into this sort of very strange wonderland of no signpost in my car, and I thought I must call up my head of department, tell him to go and explain to my students what they need to be getting on with. And I was thinking of pulling a map out of my glove compartment, and in the UK, yes, it is on this side, the steering wheel is on this side. And I was eating a banana, I have to confess at the time. What I actually did, and this is a true story, is that I spoke to my head of department, or attempted to, in the banana. I bit onto the phone, and I hit the car in front. Cost me about $700 worth of damage.